like, what is green? How green? You know, like on the scale, are we light green? Are we medium? Are we dark? What does green mean? And it means different things to different people. And so getting some regulation, some clarity and some consistency with standards has really been needed for a long time. It's about making sure you take people on that journey, because investing money in assets is fantastic, but being able to uplift the community around it is even more important.
Welcome to the People, Property, Place podcast. Today, I'm joined by Inga Ahaneku, Senior Vice President and Head of ESG at Mark. Mark, formerly Meyer Bergman, is a multi-platform investment manager which specialises in strategies that run parallel to their closed-ended value-add funds. As a vertically integrated real estate investment management business, they have assets across multiple geographies and sectors, including last mile logistics, mixed use, retail, offices, and residential. At Mark, Inga is responsible for driving ESG initiatives across the Mark corporate and investment platforms. Prior to joining Mark, Inga worked at Polestar Development Management, where she developed their ESG platform, including targets and objectives, and the submission of the BCorp certification. And prior to this, she worked for Tishman Speyer in London as EU Head of Sustainability and EU Head of Procurement. Inga, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Not at all. Well, I think we're going to have a lot of fun with this, or I certainly feel like that.
I hope so.
I'm really interested to find out a little bit more about your role at Mark, unpacking ESG, what it means, how we can apply it to real estate and the different assets and geographies that no doubt your role covers. But before we get on to that, as you know, a place that I always like to start is how and why did you get into real estate?
It's a really interesting question, a long-winded one, and not a direct pathway, as some of your previous participants possibly have. But it's an eclectic mix, and it's been great to hear, differing stories. I literally was raised in the middle of central Queensland, Australia, many, many moons ago. Decided I didn't really know what I wanted to do, obviously, but, being a bit of a country bumpkin, I thought, the world is my oyster, who knows? Got into a university and wanting to do politics and Southeast Asian studies and a bit of an eclectic mix, and ended up working for the Northern Territory government for a stint, and then also for a member of the federal government. So my background in Australia is political based. But my father and brother are both working in construction and have for a number of years. And so I've already, kind of understood a lot of the challenges of actually doing construction in a regional setting, which is, procurement challenges, temperature challenges, accessing goods from a very limited supply chain. I came over here to start afresh. It must be 21 years ago now. And I started at the very bottom of my career again, working for Minerva, who were a development company at that point. And there was a real interesting, eclectic group of people that really gave me a broad experience of what development and property was all about in London. And for that, I kind of feel that gave me the real lust to learn and really wanted to get into further developing my career. So it started out literally just being in the kind of administrative side of life. And then, project management, getting exposure to all kind of different, aspects of it, right through asset management, development, the project management spectrum, PR, marketing, all of that wonderful stuff. It really did expose me to a fantastic amount of high-end London real estate. They had the Walbrook, the St. Botolph scheme, Lancaster Gate, real eclectic, high-end, A1 offices, high-end residential, fantastic way to kind of start and cut your teeth, as it were.
Can you just paint a picture of what it was like growing up and where you grew up? Because it's so far away from London.
It is. It's a very unusual upbringing. So I was basically on a sheep station, and my mother was my teacher. But we were 2.5 hours from any kind of major services, shall I say. So I was School of the Air, and we had the flying doctor service. So my mother used to say, unless you're dead, we don't call them, because it's just a long way out for people to come, and postal services, medical services, whatever. You really had to just graft on your own and make the best of what you had. And unless you were, as my mother put it, near death, you just got on with it. You just got on with it. Exactly.
So really, really remote.
Very remote. Yeah.
Very
absolutely.
community orientated, or
absolutely. I think our closest neighbours were still, a schlep away. They were an hour from homestead to homestead. It was a vast, quite arid, landscape, but it was a very close-knit community. We used to have these tennis days, which were extraordinary, on these really very basic. They had tried to compact the earth, shall we say. It wasn't quite your clay court, experience, but, it brought everyone together. At least, I'd say, a couple of times a year we'd have these big events. It was absolutely fantastic.
And people would fly in on their little Cessnas and quad bike there.
None of them were quite, these were sheep farmers in central Queensland. We didn't have that kind of wealth. But, people would come together. We had several cases where we had people from the town come and, buy a property, have no understanding of how to run it, and the dangers that come with running in a remote location which has arid conditions, droughts, whatnot. Several occasions we had to do manhunts together as a community because people had got lost wandering into the wilderness. And, if you don't know how to
survive in 50-degree temperature.
Yeah, you're in trouble. Yeah, absolutely. So it was a very wonderful childhood, very unique. But I think it does put you in good stead to really be able to manage yourself and manage expectations about life. Not everything's there, and it kind of helps me explain a little bit about, when I'm talking about ESG and resources now in this, modern context. We've got limited supplies of stuff left. We can't just merrily keep using it to the degree we are. So I think it's given me appreciation for climate. It's given me appreciation for resources. It's given me appreciation for people. And I came out of that experience, I think, flown the nest completely and, quite a way away.
Quite.
But I just couldn't wait to see the world. It's great being part of that very close-knit community, but it's also, so much to see in the world. And I just couldn't wait to go and see it.
You went to university, right?
I did. I went to Charles Darwin in Darwin, nice name. Was the Northern Territory University then, but I dropped out. I didn't complete my course. I was on track to do political studies, Southeast Asian language, and I kind of got 3/4 of the way through that, and I was like, loved learning, but it was challenging to see where that was going to lead. And then, lo and behold, serendipity. We had a election coming up, Northern Territory, and I was kind of part of the crew that's started this university youth movement, and I was approached by a political party and said, would you like to come and do a little stint with us? Obviously free of charge, because that's how these things work, to help campaign. And I did, and haven't looked back. I did fully intend to go back and finish my degree, but 3/4 of the way through and I pulled the plug, but it was absolutely fantastic experience. I learnt an incredible amount. I learnt what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do. And, ethically, politics can pull you in a lot of different places. And I think as a young woman, I felt it was really hard to have a positive effect, and felt that there were other ways I could probably do it better. or have more impact.
So you got a one-way ticket to London?
I did. That sounds terrible, isn't it?
How did that go down with your parents?
Do you know what? I think my mother thought it would be a short stint and I'd be back. And I fully intended on doing a little, European tour, see the world, have a period away from the kind of the sticks, as it were. But it was an interesting jump from a very small pond to a very big pond, and I absolutely loved it. And I wanted to see if I could prove myself in a much bigger context. Can I survive this? Is this, can I adapt to my surroundings?
And how did you find that? Did you find that challenging just because of the cultural changes?
Listen, this is an English-speaking, country, so it wasn't too hard, right? But it was
in terms of being able to relate to people, right, and have shared experience and context.
I have always felt that you should be able to speak to the people at either ends of the spectrum. The most, I think the most valuable asset any person can have is that ability to cross culture conversation, right? Whether it's a cultural, a religious, an age, a social class, everyone has something to offer. Everyone has an opinion to give and should be valued. And I feel that hopefully I speak to, the security team and the receptionists the same I would speak to, my CEO, investors, So if you can get on with the spectrum of people, I think, you're 3/4 of the way there.
So you landed in London and you joined Minerva, you said?
Yes. Well, there was a short stint before that, but yes, Minerva is my first major
property role. But you said you were doing admin and...
Admin. I was doing admin. I did a stint at Woolworths before Woolworths became no more and the pick mix has disappeared into the ether. Yes, I did work for the property department of Woolworths just actually not too long before they dissipated, unfortunately. And that was fantastic. I got exposure to doing, fit out, which we were undertaking at that time, moving people around, fitting out half the building, moving the rest of the other half back in. It was, nice little logistics challenge. But that was a brief stint. Minerva was my first large tenure, which was 8 years in total. And that was absolutely fantastic. And I had that opportunity very graciously from two gentlemen who I still keep in contact with. And they are possibly the most brilliant of men when it comes to property development. I have learned so much from them. And the opportunity that they gave me, that they saw in me that I was capable of more than just arranging a few meetings, was absolutely life-changing and brilliant. I mean, if I hadn't have worked it out in property, I probably would have ended up in something else. But they saw that I was keen, eager, and, wanted to crack on and give it a shot. So that I was very fortunate life I've had.
And so in terms of real estate context, you said your brother and your dad were in construction. So that was your exposure, I guess, to real estate.
And the ultimate challenges of it, like in the extremes, right? In a rural environment, you don't have a wonderfully accessible supply chain. You don't have wonderful conditions. My brother was working for many, many years in, absolutely searing heat. And I'm still boggled to this day how he managed to keep that going. It's a very challenging physical environment to be producing, a state. It's not. We have our own constraints here, but I always think physically it's a lot more challenging when it's an extreme, whether that be cold or hot environments. Amazing.
So you had these two gentlemen that kind of guided you, right? Took you under their wing. Was that your opportunity to kind of work out, like, what does real estate actually mean as an industry? What does it look like? And
Yes.
what are my various different routes? Because you started off in development and project management.
Absolutely.
Correct?
Yeah. But the exposure of actually, and I think this is one of the things that we really undervalue, real estate is such a huge area as a sector in terms of the plethora of opportunities that there are for people. And that's everything from, property management, facilities management, all the way up, to investment management. A lot of our experiences tend to, if we're in the large institutions, tend to be siloed into certain categories, and you don't get a lot of cross experience or cross exposure to different. I think that's changing. Some of the big institutions are seeing that actually it's great to give people a bit of work experience in each of that, especially as they're coming up through their career. Yeah. But I found it fascinating, the different intersects within real estate. And I just loved it. I thought this is, real estate as an investment class is just so compelling, it's changing, it's ever evolving. And, you've got all types of people that come together to do all kinds of different functions within that space, but it comes together either well or not so well, dependent on the people, the same people that occupy real estate or the estate itself, right? We want our spaces to be good and functional for the people who are in it. And it's that people journey, genuinely. I love the kind of cross-section. I've had some amazing experiences with some really talented consultants on the design front who just really can envisage, take your aspiration and really deliver it into something amazing and very special. And right down, through that experience, I really understood what it meant to build a building and to create a space that was coherent, efficient, aesthetically pleasing, to be able to make the space work in flexible conditions, right? Not just building it for one specific remit, but actually if we were to, look at different floor heights, if it was possible, what would that then expose the building to in future uses? And this is something actually that's come full circle into sustainability, is genuinely trying to make those spaces future-proofed. Yeah. But also they have to be compelling for humans, right? We have to enjoy and get what we need out of that space. And there's a whole raft of wonderful people who bring that together. And that is just such an exciting part,
tangible.
Absolutely.
That product market.
It's a proud moment to say you've been a part of something, a small part of it. And I genuinely think as developers, you do have to see that, vision clearly and be able to deliver it. But it takes an entire team to do that with you. And that's the exciting bit. That's the thing that gets me up in the morning. I love it. Love it.
So your role evolved, right?
Twists and turns.
Twist and turn, but it was kind of development and project management driven. That was the kind of the niche within this whole landscape of real estate that you kind of focused on.
Absolutely. And I got the opportunity, one of the gentlemen I was talking about at Minerva very kindly gave me an opportunity to really grow and develop, and that turned into, even more exciting with Tishman was being able to work on their, and they're still there today, their HQ in Verde, Victoria. And it was just such an absolutely brilliant project to be part of. There was a great team behind that, process. We had some amazing engaged investors on that. And the whole story from start to finish, I mean, obviously there's, hurdles, challenges, all the rest of it, as you would expect. But it was an absolute delight to deliver that with the team and with my director at the time and the plethora of consultants and actually contractors and subcontractors who brought that together. It was a challenging project. It was absolutely brilliant, though, start to finish. And I'll give a small shout out to Tishman Speyer. They did the first embodied carbon survey on that building, which was well before time. That was 2014, 2015, which I think is interesting because we're still having challenges. We're still talking about embodied carbon and, how and when you do that as an exercise within an asset, particularly as most of the assets we have now are here and we're not going to be doing an awful lot of new build. It's really interesting. And the longer you're in the world of real estate, I think in London, the more you realize how intersectionally these kind of movements or changes evolve, and they've always been fundamentally there. It's just how have we taken it to the next step? We're starting to think about buildings differently now from the outset rather than just
retrospectively.
Yeah, we'll build it and they'll come. It's a lot more involved.
Considered, thoughtful.
Absolutely.
And integral right from the start.
Mm-hmm.
So you moved from a developer to Tishman, which is a capital allocator or a private equity business.
Yes, and also development. They are
integrated.
Still, yes, fully integrated platform. I moved a little bit halfway through my tenure there, and that again was another 7 years. I moved away a little bit halfway through that towards focusing more on sustainability and procurement, which actually was really interesting because moving those two kind of roles together, I found really compelling, actually from a delivery point of view, because you were able to really make change within the procurement side of life, enabling ESG metrics within that. And, I think a lot of our assumptions about the supply chain and people have differing opinions on this, but I think if you can help your supply chain early on understand what it is you're trying to achieve and how to go about it and have some flexibility with that ambition so that they can, create and curate that project or that product around you, you have so much more value to be gleaned out of that experience. And again, it comes down to people and stakeholder management, dare I say. But I found that was a really interesting mix of roles for me. And that was, moving away from just being project-faced to more of the sustainability, investor-facing. Procurement was also, quite an interesting triage.
Do you think you would have been able to make that move without that project management and development delivery experience?
I think it helped immeasurably. I think it definitely gave me the standing to really understand the assets from the ground up, right? To really know what it takes to, to have those conversations, with supply chain. I was having conversations with subcontractors, with contractors, with the design team, really trying to bring that experience together and use it well. So it was just bringing that real estate understanding from a base level and applying it to something different. And ESG actually wasn't a huge jump. I mean, the first people to really consider ESG in any project are the developers and the project managers. You have to start embedding this early if you're going to meet certain criteria. They were they are the instigators of a lot of the opportunities for innovation, particularly when we're doing refurbishments, right? Which is where most of our next projects are probably coming from.
If we cast our mind back, so I know there's a lot of investor pressure in terms of assets that have got certain credentials, and there's also a lot of occupier pressure as well to occupy these buildings. 10 years ago or whatever we're talking, you said there was guidelines and there was, they're the instigators of that change. Who really was driving it back then?
Well, I think there was ambitions if it made sense from a product delivery side and it wasn't a massive capex uplift, right? You would have a far more compelling case. And most people go, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Where I think it's changed and where I think it needed to always come from is the investor. The capital markets really drive change. True change right down to the ground. If you have investors saying, we're only going to purchase assets that are net zero, right? That is a compelling reason for people to go, right, okay, design day one, it's net zero, and then we move accordingly. I think From the development project management side, we're always trying to find ways, and this is back to value adding and, the good old QS, making sure you're actually getting value for your money. A lot of sustainability, which people haven't really appreciated, is about using resources efficiently. Do you think that you're going to pay more because you've asked garbage, a refuse company to segregate your waste? Do you really think you're going to be paying more? Actually, no. You actually save money by doing that in a lot of jurisdictions. Not every jurisdiction, obviously, but in most jurisdictions, particularly in London, that actually saves you cost, particularly if you say to the contractor, I want you to segregate this. It's an ESG remit, but it's also a cost saving. Like genuinely,
the net benefit from just doing the right thing.
The right thing can often be actually quite cost effective. And that goes to, we've gone full circle with this now, and we've gone to the circular economy, which is about reusing the building fabric or MEP where we possibly can. Why on earth would you go and get brand spanking new anything unless there was a health reason or an efficiency reason? There's quite a lot of kit in our buildings that are perfectly reusable, and we should be doing that. And it's cost effective. Why wouldn't we? And actually, in most cases, you can save time on program. So win-win-win. So
did you identify this changing or this opportunity and go, I want to lead it and combine that ESG and sustainability aspect with the procurement?
I wish I was that.
Or was it a case of, this is a bit of a pain. This is quite a lot of admin. We know it's good business. Yep. We know we should be doing it, yep. But actually the time it takes to do it. Who can we assign to take on this monkey and be responsible for delivering it?
I was going to say, I would love to say I was that fortuitous in seeing this, but I mean, I think probably from my upbringing and actually resource management, actually from my days on the farm, genuinely, you couldn't waste water. It was not a good idea to waste a very limited resource, right? And naturally that made complete sense to me. You can, I was speaking to people, 10 years ago about ESG, and you were having to explain why it was a good idea. I don't think you have to do that anymore. I don't think people genuinely see the benefits of, reusing and limiting what they don't need in terms of resources. I fell into this completely, and it was a fortuitous move that Tishman's had a need for ESG reporting, but actually goes far more than, ESG reporting's the starting block, right? But there's actually a whole lot of initiatives and, policies and, development directionally was heading in that way. You could see that the tenants were going to have to do this for their own requirements, their own reporting requirements. You could see that the resources, and sometimes, I think COVID actually gave us a great insight into limited supply chain and what that actually means. And gosh, maybe we should think about, do we really need this particular thing from this particular jurisdiction? But I think with all of it, it came back down to timing and opportunity. And as most of us in our careers just have the chance to develop and use our previous skill sets in a different way, in a more specific way that the companies need at that point. And I think you just have to be open to the fact that, we all evolve, change is going to happen, and be open to the opportunity, see it as an opportunity rather than, oh gosh, I've just been offloaded this. Yeah. Nobody else wants to do it. And, you seem a likely suspect. Why
you
not?
Seem willing.
Yeah.
You do it.
You're very chatty today. Why don't we give this to you? No, but I genuinely do think every chance you get to learn a different aspect within, whatever sector you're in, but in real estate, there's just a plethora of things to learn. And actually one of the kind of evolutions will all of this is that eventually we're all intersecting, right? And so you bring your different skill sets, your your specialisms, but actually I think there's a need to become more generalist with understanding of how things work from cradle to grave, genuinely, because I think you become acutely aware of value and how to add it or to be wary of going down a certain road because you've had that eclectic.
Is that because you've got that development background? Is it easier to look at it or identify it because you can look at it from a development and a lifestyle perspective?
Yeah,
cycle perspective?
I think development gives you a really broad skill set in understanding, taking a site and being given a remit and a design or coming up with it and delivering it to a market at a point in time is a very intricate and very challenging mix of, of kind of opportunities and also, risks that come with it, right? And it's navigating that. And lo and behold, ESG is opportunity and risk. It is exactly the same. It's just looking at your asset with I don't like to make this delineation, but it's there. There are financial risks and opportunities. There are non-financial risks and opportunities. And I think the bleeding of those two considerations is really coming to the fore with ESG because evidence is suggesting that we're moving towards a very real risk situation with some buildings that just won't be able to function in 10, 20, 30 years' time because the MEP is outdated or because nobody wants to be in it because it's inefficient. We're going to be paying through the nose for our energy.
Or banks won't lend against it.
Quite. And investors are driving that change. They are, the most pivotal directionists at the same time as the tenants who are taking the space. I think it's really coming together now. I would love and be quite happy, as I'm sure some tenants are, to be in a more efficient building with more efficient systems and perhaps willing to pay a bit more for that. It would be simple. It's going to hit my reporting bottom line. It's going to hit my financial bottom line. Done.
Quick one from me. If you haven't already subscribed or followed this show on the podcast or app where you listen or watch, please do. It takes 10 seconds and helps tremendously. I've got really big plans for the People, Property, Place podcast, and that one small action really, really helps grow the show and the presence and enables us to keep doing what we're doing. So if you haven't already, please follow or like on the platform you watch or listen to. Thanks so much. You moved after 7.5 years or so from Tishman to Polestar. Can you just tell me about that transition and how and why it came about and what you were doing?
That was a big shift. I did mention it to people at the time and there was a bit of shock and horror, like, you're going for this very large institution, HR department, IT department, all these, global institutional, company to this very small, UK-based company. And it was the best decision. It was exposing me to areas I had not been in detail. It was really fantastic to have that exposure and to have that, there was no safety net, right? You are in it together with a very limited number of people and you are really providing that front-end service. You're instigating, and I will forever be grateful to Brett for the opportunity. Fantastic exposure, fantastic company, fantastic gentleman. It unfortunately paralleled with Trussonomics and, a very challenging financial, everything changed overnight. I think it's a shame of that timing because I was, absolutely bought into the opportunity that we could develop things together. And, I wish Brett all the best of luck. It is a tough market to do from a standing start.
Do development work.
Absolutely. But I think, Brett is an absolute champion and has worked incredibly hard over his career to develop, from his Stanhope days onwards. And he is a great operator. I really value, the time there. It was absolutely fantastic to be right in the detail on absolutely everything.
Weeds of a development, small niche.
Absolutely, sourcing, investor, the capital raising. It was just absolutely fantastic. And I think those opportunities are a rare find these days. I really did feel it was a big jump from an institution, but actually it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Wouldn't have changed it.
So you were there for just shy of 2 years or so, and then you moved to Mark. Can you just tell me about how and why and what it is that you do at Mark as well?
Sure. So, I moved to Mark. It's just been over 12 months now. Mark's a fantastic company, great pan-European exposure. We've had, a fundraise for Crossbay 2, which is our last mile logistics platform. We have quite a number of assets which are mixed residential, retail, office, again, pan-European. We're doing a fantastic job at the moment with our last mile logistics, which everyone's very excited about. But it's, from my perspective, I'm head of ESG, so I am doing corporate initiatives, but I'm also looking at the fund level criteria. So on Crossbay 2, we are a SFDR Article 8 fund.
What does that mean?
Yes, we have lots of acronyms in ESG. So SFDR is the Sustainable Financial Disclosure Regulation, which is EU. So anybody who wants to raise capital in the EU or for EU funds has to have an article status. So you're either Article 6, which I'm going to really simplify,
Please
a very extensive very extensive piece of legislation. Article 6 is, you've disclosed as a fund, but you do not take ESG principles into consideration at all. That's Article 6. Article 8, you take ESG considerations into your financial and investment decisions. There is a large, let's say, plethora of options on that. And that can be, you could say your Article 8 is going to focus on only purchasing EPC buildings of, C and above, or you're going to hit BREEAM excellent only, or you're going to make sure, or I should say, you normally have a long list, or you can hit certain social criteria where you're going to invest a certain amount of AUM into a socially, mobile opportunity, which is going to be linked to the fund. Then you've got Article 9, which is, if I could measure these, I'd call it no green, light green, and dark green. The light green, meaning that Article 8 pool does consider sustainability criteria, but then your Article 9 really is your more impact fund level criteria. And
militant green evangelists sit in that space?
Yes. I mean, I don't think they'd call themselves or market themselves as green evangelists. That could be a new business line. But they very much take ESG criteria to the heart of the fund. And I always considered that if you were an Article 9 fund, you were really in the renewable sector. So you were doing, the solar farm or the wind farm, or you were into, a very specific social impact piece. That is a very loose, and some of my colleagues out there will be absolutely shrieking at the thought that I've carved it up so simply as that. But I do think one of the issues with a lot of this, and we've had a huge amount of regulation come in, because it's been so hard to classify funds. Like, what is green? How green? Like on the scale, are we light green? Are we medium? Are we dark? What does green mean? And it means different things to different people. And so getting some regulation, some clarity, and some consistency with standards has really been needed for a long time. And I think the challenge has been trying to synergize what that looks like. And of course, it takes time to feed through. It takes time to resource. It takes time to get it in alignment. But I think we're moving in the right direction. those investors who are really scoping and saying, unless you're Article 8 and you have this criteria, like forget it, or it has to be Article 9 or whatever it might be, they are having a huge impact on the whole, fund management sector, and therefore real estate products coming out. But I think the opportunities are there, the value add is there, the challenges come in how you scope and how you advertise it without going into the greenwashing. We also have a new thing called green hushing, where people don't want to talk about what their ESG credentials are because they feel that they might be, or they might
not be driving them as well as they should be, or?
No, I think the green hushing comes from a worry about being accused of greenwashing, right? So you go to the other end of the spectrum, you say, actually, we're going to say nothing. But there's also, there's a lot of, the Americans are having a bit of a resurgence of, we don't want to talk about ESG. We don't want, this is not a criteria for us. And there's motives and political,
of course,
momentum behind all of that. And that's absolutely fine, each to their own. But I do think, we have a real scientific, factually based issue here in that the world is heating up. We are going to have more climatic events that are going to impact real estate, that are going to impact people. They already are. If we choose or we don't choose to assess that risk and then find the opportunity for the value add, or, mitigate that risk as a bare minimum, I think, genuinely there are concerns that we're going to leave ourselves, some decision will leave us perhaps, in the red and not the black, which is where we all want to be.
You talked about kind of legislation and needed legislation at a fund level. Mm-hmm. The challenge, and I might be really wrong here, so correct me, is yes, you can have it at the fund level, but how does that translate to the granularity at the asset level? And then how does that translate across different asset classes?
Absolutely.
And then different geographies as well?
A huge challenge. So I would say, when you have a fund and you're setting up a fund, my golden rule is always ask what people want first, especially in this day and age, because you can get a lot out of, what is it that you would like to see in your fund? Your investment pool is doing what? What would you like to see? The second thing is to understand that the fund structure around your ESG credentials can be quite simple. How that goes down into the asset level is interesting, but it is completely transferable. So, for example, our Cross-Bay 2, we've got Article 8. We are hitting certain criteria on our EPC. Why are we hitting that? Because if regulation changes, and it likely will, we do not want to have any assets that we can't lease or who have lost value because we need to then go back and do massive CapEx to uplift it. Yep. So how do we mitigate it? You got to consider a CapEx plan over a certain period. And, how do we do that? At each asset, it is, it's not one size fits all. You have to assess the asset. Where does it sit? It doesn't preclude us from buying, lower than EPC, but as long as we've CapExed in that we can do those upgrades, or in a lot of cases, these are FRLI leases, there might be opportunities for the tenants to actually want to upgrade, and we'll help them facilitate that. Maybe it's a joint venture program. Maybe it's the tenant alone. We can have those conversations, but that's, one example at EPC level. We're also looking to make sure that our assets, which, we're building the platform, replicating what we did on Cross-Bay 1, which was a great success. Cross-Bay 2 is now, looking at how are we taking these non-institutional products, bringing them onto a platform of institutional standard, what needs to be done. That CapEx is in there. That is hitting not just EPC, but, regs, any kind of health and safety that hasn't been met by that asset initially, and planning that and just getting it in place. What has to be done first is obviously the regulatory requirements, but what's coming next is, when's the next tenant event? What can we do to uplift the spec of the building? All of those considerations, which are actually intuitive to what you would do on a business plan or an asset management plan, but we look at it alongside our SFDR criteria. And part of that's also getting the data, which is lots of fun in last mile logistics sheds in a pan-European context. But you need to start stakeholder managing, with the tenants and saying, listen, we would love to understand how this building is working for you. Is it efficient? Is there something we could help you with? Because, of course, the tenant's going to need landlord authorization, and ideally we'd like to see value added to our assets. So how do we manage that within the business plan? These are all considerations that happen, based on that. Legacy assets, not necessarily categorized yet, but again, you're looking towards your exit. What are we doing to solidify the value as we exit some of these assets as they're coming up towards the end of the fund life? And they're challenging decisions, right? Because CapEx is not always there at the end of the fund.
Or, I don't know, maybe the M&E is 5 years old.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't make sense to rip it out and chuck in a brand new air source heat pump, right?
Exactly. And we would never advocate doing that if there was life still left in that kit, right? You have to remember that, yes, whilst you've got your operational carbon, which is very important, the embodied carbon, right, the carbon it has cost to put that MEP kit in there, it's not worth ripping it out before the end of its life. But as much as it seems intuitive just to rip out the MEP and do it all, there are some amazing things that, all of us as, asset owners can do. And it can be as simple as a BMS, commissioning check.
What's that?
So, building management.
I'm on a jargon busting quest with this podcast.
Oh, we love a good acronym in ESG too. BMS, the building management system. So often some of these, simpler pieces of real estate, last mile logistics, they can have very limited kit in them. It might be one incoming water main, one incoming electric feed, one incoming gas. Simple. The building management system and how that electric, deals with the office component and how it deals with the warehouse. What is it being used for? How is the efficiency being monitored? A BMS upgrade, a very simple piece of, it might be software or it might be the whole hardware needs to be upgraded. Usually in simpler assets, it is quite, cost effective. But I've seen multiple examples over my experience in a 20% efficiency within the systems with a BMS upgrade. It's entirely possible. It doesn't take a lot of CapEx to get a lot of input.
Get some wins.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it depends on the asset class. It depends on the location. It depends on, what you're seeking to do. I would look at, not just, I don't want to just get to net zero. Obviously, that's great and that's where we should move to. But can my CapEx plan allow it? Or can I have a conversation with my tenant about looking at their energy consumption, reducing their overall costs? And there's, a potential for a rental uplift that reflects that, right? Not in every case is that going to be possible. But at the same time, I think the market and the aspiration and where people will, a flight to quality will happen. People want certain buildings in certain locations with a certain functionality and a certain flexibility. And they will be willing to pay for that, I think, when it's a quality product that has efficiencies built in. And that comes from, the base build side, retrofitting, but also understanding your asset and how it's working and how it could better work for both you and the tenant. That doesn't necessarily mean, we all joke in the kind of ESG world that buildings are really efficient until you put people in them, just on a base consumption level. But it's really important to make sure that the building is doing what it needs to do for the tenant, but also, is it working efficiently as an overall product? And that's something that I think you can spend very little getting to the bottom of that and really understanding what's going on in the building and adjusting accordingly.
I was talking to someone the other day and they said, we need to get rid of this rhetoric around that's an ESG building.
Oh, no, I hate that. There is no ESG building, right? I think there's
environmental
credentials
or credentials associated, but they might lack social or impact or governance aspect to it.
Potentially. I think the way to look at this is not to consider, and ESG has such a plethora of submatter to it that people get lost in the reads. And I think the best way to kind of look at your assets is to look at, efficiency first. I am a big believer, it's great to have green building certifications, etc. But I believe the best determination of a building's efficiency is in its in the backbone, in the BMS, in understanding like what is your CO2 output per meter squared. That's a really important number for a tenant to understand actually how efficient is this building. And, how is that building engaging with its tenants, with its actual occupiers? And when I say tenants, that's a very old word, right? Customers, clients, people who walk
Users.
in the door. Exactly. It could be a guest. I think it's important that engagement piece really enlivens the space, as particularly when you're talking about mixed use and offices and resi context. There is a great opportunity for us to create, an ecosystem that works for everyone, that is interactive, that is a seamless experience coming into the building. And I'm actually working on a little project at the moment, which is about that exact delivery, making the real estate interact with its users, and give useful feedback to the landlord to be able to adapt and to change and to, tweak certain things about the offering. It's really key. There's some fundamental data sets that come out of buildings these days, and you've got to determine whether or not it's what you want out of it as a tenant and as a landlord, and tweaking it to
as an
set.
Investor.
Yeah.
And then how to report on it, right?
Quite.
Because
exactly.
investors might have capital in lots of different funds, and they're sat there thinking, I'm getting 4 or 5 different reports on lots of different things, almost standardizing what are the key metrics that they need to look for.
And
right?
investors are very savvy about what they're wanting to produce. What they have, either their own net zero targets or they have their own social targets. A lot of these institutional pension funds, they're driven by people like you and I who've got money in pensions, and we want to spend our money ethically. We don't want to be investing in things that aren't either pushing towards a more sustainable future for our children and grandchildren, or, whether or not we're doing that in a they call it the just transition. This is a bit of an ESG vibe word, but it's about making sure you take people on that journey, because investing money in assets is fantastic, but being able to uplift the community around it is even more important. So I think there's lots of drivers, and investors are very savvy and very focused and very driven on how they would like to see their capital deployed. And it's fantastic. It's been a long time coming.
Can you just talk to me about the ESG teams, because it's normally quite a small team on an investor side, but you lean on external consultants as well, right?
Yeah.
Is that driven primarily because you are a cost to the business, whereas an external consultant is a cost to the investor? And so actually, if you can kind of keep a leaner team, you kind of tick the boxes in terms of being able to have someone to sit in front of capital. But you don't want to have too large a team, because then it kind of really drags in the profits or returns.
It's a question that only each fund manager or investor can answer, depending on what they're trying to achieve. I'm obviously in at market at 12 months. I need to prove my value, which hopefully I'm doing that. It's important to have in-house expertise. I think that is a really important thing to have, but it's also an evolving market, and it is difficult to find the right people, right? There's a lot of people needing internal ESG consultancy and advice, and that's fantastic. But at the moment, I think our trajectory at the moment is I am a team of 1, which is very exciting, but I do have a huge amount of help and support from my team on the ground, which, they're in the assets every day. I can't be across a pan-European portfolio so easily, nor would I want the air miles attributed to that whatsoever. But it is really important that we are integrating ESG through the entire business. And my whole aspiration is to actually make my job redundant. If I can get everybody living and breathing our ESG strategy and its evolvement, which I think naturally happens once you start understanding, oh, actually, this is driven by, this requirement, or I can actually, impact here. It becomes, part of the business structure. It's not a thing that gets done as a tick box on the side. It's inherently the optic for which you look through and to see, your assets and the management of them and the investment of them and the creation of your funds to that level. I think at the moment, it is important to have a representative when you're capital raising, but I also think it's really important that, investors see value for money, right? And having, I couldn't justify a team of 10, right? That would be excessive. But, the larger houses do have teams and they are growing. And it is cost effective to a degree. But obviously, things are changing and evolving and people will adapt, I think, depending on what the latest regulations coming down the line and how it's going to be infused. But I do see, it differing depending on, what the fund is, what the business structure is, and, where you are on your journey. It doesn't make sense to suddenly launch a team on my poor little asset managers and acquisitions team. Now they would not be happy about that.
So there's an awful lot as a one-man, one-woman team to kind of consider. How does one go about working out what to prioritize, what's important and what isn't?
Great question. It's predominantly a consideration, obviously, for each and every business. Now, you can look at it from a business perspective, a fund perspective, or an asset perspective. Obviously, at Mark, we have to consider everything. So in 2023, we undertook quite an intensive materiality assessment, which is really to understand what are the drivers of the business, who are our stakeholders, what are they wanting, how are they reacting to certain ESG requirements, what are our peers doing, what do our people think? There is the gambit of questions that genuinely, we want to retain talent. How do we do that? Our younger team members have an interest in ESG, want to know where we're going with our strategy and how we're going to, have a look at this opportunity risk, prism of ESG. And they're very much obviously invested because as a younger person who's considering their own future and where the world's going to be, ESG is very much on the forefront of everybody's mind. My teenagers are forever referencing that, my generation and the generations before have blown the planet. And what are you going to do about it, Mum? But it's a consideration we have to look at as a business. And we've done that assessment. It's been fantastic for everyone to get involved and to give feedback. We've gone out to our investors to ask their opinions about where they see the market going, because wherever they see the market going is where we need to be aware of the opportunity and the risk. Yeah. We also had a look at our regulatory, environment and how that's changing. And across a pan-European portfolio, it's huge.
Ever evolving.
Exactly. And, it's not out of the realms of possibility that there will be considerations from governments in the near future looking for further tax opportunities to look at carbon tax. They've done it in New York. They've done it in other jurisdictions. It is a way of having business pay their dues for the carbon emitted. And so there is a real challenge coming with how do we mitigate this? How do we value this on the bottom line? And really looking at that. So we've undertaken the materiality assessment. We have a new Mark ESG strategy coming on the back of it, a new policy, which is reflective of all those considerations we've had, talking about what is the most important consideration. And every business will have a different focus point depending on where they're at. But I think every business should at some point do this exercise. It's very it's very involved, but it's also very revealing as to, where the possible blind spots are and how to mitigate them, and how are we considering each and every kind of part of that process, which there are quite a few parts.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's about getting ahead of the curve, right?
Absolutely.
And future-proofing yourself, but the business and the opportunity to raise capital and go again. Because I guess the people who aren't, it's going to be left behind.
Yes, well, quite. And I do think there is a lot of, opportunity still out there with the plethora of buildings that are still in existence and will be in existence by 2050. We've got opportunities for major value add. And so I think striking while the iron's hot and really understanding what that value is really important for any business, especially in real estate.
For someone listening to this who could be in investment, asset management, development, or another part of the real estate investment management world, who wants to lean further into ESG and sustainability or have more ownership as part of their career, what advice would you give them?
Go and find your head of ESG, and if you don't have one, maybe make the business case for one.
Give me a call.
Yeah, quite. Listen, there are so many resources out there that are available. You can look on LinkedIn. You just need to hook up with a couple of, ESG consultants. You'll start getting a plethora of information through. But I think genuinely, just be inquisitive. Just ask where you think there could be opportunity. Lots of industry events are available now. Go along to a couple of those. A huge gambit will open up in terms of the art of the possible and how far you might want to take it. But I think if you're interested in it, there is a lot to be done and to be taken on as a just an educational piece. It doesn't mean every single piece of the ESG world will be compatible or, in fact, material to what it is you're trying to achieve with your fund or your career or your, even your investments, right? It's for you to kind of navigate and see what's out there. And I think the most important thing for a lot of people in real estate is decarbonization, right? And getting our buildings running efficiently and running well. It's a great return on investment, period. But it is
one part of it.
Sorry?
That's one part of the wider picture.
Exactly. And so, you can take it as far as you want to take it. But the one thing I'd say about the ESG community, and I think this is a huge positive, we're very collaborative. I want people to take our case studies and learn from them. I don't want people going down rabbit holes, and lots of different organizations are out there to prevent people from, wasting time going down a certain path when it may not be actually worthwhile or may not have the return on investment that you're looking for. The Better Buildings Partnership, UKGBC, UNPRI have got some great, collaborating opportunities for people. I just think if you have an issue or a concern or what is my risk on this, just start getting involved, digging, asking the questions. Have we thought about this? Have we considered what the impact might be from a regulatory perspective? I'd be surprised. A lot of people have started the journey.
Yeah.
It's just how far you are down that curve. And even those who haven't started, you're probably doing things without even realizing it. Genuinely, there's been movements in the markets in what's accepted now, what's, sought after, and people are, starting to move, whether it's badged ESG or not. I mean, I really don't like that generalized term. I think there's, for me, this is all about mitigating risk, adding value, creating better products, creating better, communities. It's might be badged as ESG, but it seems like, best in class business practice. That's what we aim to do.
I feel like I could talk to you. I've got so many more questions. Certification, Mark the business, the platform dealing with mixed use asset. It could go on and on and on. I think we're going to have to reserve that for a future episode, if you'd be so kind to come back and join me. But as we draw to a close, a question that I ask everyone who comes on the podcast is, £500 million worth of capital. Who are the people? What property and which place would you be allocating that?
I love that question. So I would have to say that diversifying your investments is always a good idea. I'm quite a, mitigating of risk person, as my female nature is. So I would invest in different platforms. I think last mile logistics is amazing. I think it's got a huge future ahead of it. I like senior living. I also think residential and retail and office still have a huge part to play in the UK, but everywhere it's a human essential need. We're going to need offices, we're going to need retail, we're going to need residential. I would diversify probably 100 million in each of those. Why not? And focused on high quality hires, people with really good experience. I think particularly in the development side, it is where the value is. And that's just because I'm slightly biased.
And locations?
Locations, urban cities. It's a real changing feast. I think London is still good, but I am intrigued to see where some of the European capital cities go. I really do think that there are some locations that are of huge change, populace-wise, and, disposable incomes will drive a lot of change in some of the urban environments, but underpinning all of it would have to be an amazing ESG strategy naturally. So 100 million in each, pan-European, diversification of locations, urban settings predominantly, and definitely with a great ESG strategy behind it.
With a couple of senior hires. And I didn't press you early on in our conversation around those two gentlemen who are mentors of yours.
Yes.
Would they be coming on the journey with you?
Totally.
And can you disclose who they are? Or is that for another time?
I can certainly disclose who they are. So one is a Mr. Alexander Morris, who's currently with Bentel Greenoak, who is an amazing operator and has helped me immeasurably from start to finish of my career in London. He's had a huge influence, and he's an absolutely fantastic operator and an amazing deliverer of ESG credentials in buildings. Inherently, he is built to deliver value and efficiency. Former QS, by the way. And Mr. Peter Holroyd, who actually started my career at Minerva and gave me the opportunity when I was not the most polished, I was not the most educated, and I was not the most of, shall we class, certain class stock. But I think I was a compelling hire for him, and hopefully I delivered. But he is also an absolute gem of a gentleman and very development focused, great opportunity to work with him. And yes, absolutely would take them along with me.
Well, Inga, you've had an amazing background, a phenomenal career, and you're right at the forefront in terms of driving change across our built environment. And I've loved talking to you. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, and excited to see what you
pleasure.
And the wider business go on to achieve.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the People, Property, Place podcast. If you found it insightful, feel free to share it with a friend or colleague. Give us a rating, like, or comment. It helps tremendously. It'd be great to hear from you on LinkedIn. I'm super open-minded to recommendations of guests that we should have on the show or areas of the market we should explore further. So do drop me a message. The People, Property, Place podcast is powered by Rockborn. The team recruit leadership and future leadership hires for real estate owners, funds, investors, and developers. So if you're looking to hire top talent for your business, head over to the website www.rockborn.com, where you'll be able to find a wealth of information, or feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. Have a great day wherever you are, and I look forward to catching you next time.